1954, the early 1950s. He did a tremendous quantity of work in 1955 in establishing his subject matter, his directives in painting, his statement, his vocabulary, and then as a transition painter, the influences that he waged upon the pop artists that developed in the early 1960s, 1961 with Claes Oldenburg. Jasper Johns is still considered a young painter, and in his first show, when he was only 28, which is an extremely early age for any painter to be having a major one-man exhibit in New York, at the Leo Castelli Gallery. Mr. Castelli was one who sponsored many of the younger modern painters of the mid-20th century. Jasper Johns was the son of a farmer in Augusta, Georgia, or near Augusta, Georgia, and was born in 1930. He works in South Carolina today. He grew up, his childhood was in South Carolina. And one of the few of the major New York painters that does not have a studio in New York City now. He prefers the quietness of the seaside village in which he lives in South Carolina, and then just goes to New York delivering his paintings or for different exhibitions. He did have some studios moving around New York City during the early 1950s, becoming friends with the leading contemporary painters, still influenced by the earlier abstract expressionists. Slide, please. Jasper Johns takes ordinary, everyday objects that one always sees but really never looks at. This is the beginning of his flag series, and he took the idea of the flag because it was already designed, as he said, and presented it on a flat surface as the flag stretched out, stiff, starched, would appear on a flat surface. It is a symbolic representation of the country, and in taking this, he felt that he later then, as we will see, sort of intermingled with his flag series of taking the recognizable objects, but the flag was representative of something. It was already a symbol. Later on in his style, he went into the alphabet and into numbers, using them, things we are familiar with, but things that we really don't place a symbolic meaning on. They become icons, visual images of symbols that we see every day. And in some of his later ones, for instance, the alphabet, of where these things are gridded off into sort of strong, sharp patterns, with the alphabet that does not spell anything, it is not in order, or his number series, or and then later his map paintings, where things are identified, or his color fields, of where we will see identifications of colors and of names. These do not have the representation that the flag series has. The flag series is a very sort of intriguing one, of where he employs collage, and he also works in a slightly different medium, that of encaustic, E-N-C-A-U-S-T-I-C, which is wax. It is a wax medium that is blended with oil pigments and then heat applied to it so that it sets up very fast. It has a translucency to it. It does not have the runny or the shiny quality of thinned down enamel, so it can almost be plastered onto the surface of the canvas in fairly heavy blobs, slightly melted or heat applied until it sets up like quick candle wax in a molten state, and then as soon as the heat is removed, the candle wax sets up, so that you can work again on it almost immediately. Slide, please. I do not have the very earliest examples. His first series that brought him some notation were a target series of nothing but these concentric rings, a very dynamic pattern, and then sometimes he would employ collage or combines of the painting with plaster masks of people. He has almost a satirical sense of viewpoint with his paintings. For instance, the masks were life masks made of friends that are these sort of blank-eyed, blank-expressioned faces. The target is almost a representation of the mouth, of the oral image of that you see people, you hear people through what they say. This is the image that they produce. He wanted to produce these things that were so commonplace, not to make a statement, but that you, as the viewer, would bring any symbolic representation to it, to the painting. Slide, please. In this one, he reverses the collage technique of rather gluing things on top of the surface. He glued the newsprint in the papers underneath and then built in this translucent encaustic material the flag on top of the newsprint paper, so that you have this slight image of happenings, of news, of what the content of the newspaper says. It's like if we glance at a newspaper, we know immediately, without even reading anything or recognizing anything on the page, the content of what a newspaper would contain. Advertisements, sales, news, death notices, obituaries, comics. We know the content of what a newspaper, per se, represents to us without having to read it. If we want the particulars, then we start reading each story, or something will catch our eye. So he employs the use of the newspaper just as a modern-day symbol of containing things, and then builds the flag representation on top of it. His flags were always stretched out flat, sort of a nice combination of the flatness, the two-dimensional quality of the flag itself, and the two-dimensional surface of the painting, the surface that it's decorating. Slide, please. In this one, Gray Alphabet, where he employs just a straight grid pattern over the entire surface, it has the same overall textured effect that Monet's Rouen Cathedral series has. It becomes a little monotonous in its presentation. And yet, this was done in 1956, and it's a fairly large painting, 66 inches by 49 inches across, or a little larger than 4 by 5 feet. Slide, please. We see a detail as you move in closer to the letters of the texture of the canvas showing through. The different blendings of the tones of white that form these letters that almost appear as a stenciled effect, a mechanical reproduction of the letters. Now this was done 5 years before the advent of pop art, whose the people that were producing the pop, or that would produce the pop art, were showing the commonplace, lifting the commonplace, much the same as Courbet did in the 19th century, and presenting it in an art form. Of course, this is greatly enlarged, the letters. Slide, please. He has worked constantly in these sort of combines of where the surface changes. This one is called Gray Rectangles, and is a square composition, was done about the same time. But the collage of the 3 rectangles, the gray ones, is part, or the center of interest of your composition, is raised slightly from the picture surface. Slide, please. And in this one, sort of an optical illusion. It's not much of a statement. It's just a sort of a fun piece that he did on the flag series, is that if you will glance at the little white dot that's placed in the center of the upper flag, he has used the visual effects of your eye tiring of a certain color, of the complementary color scheme or the opposites, so that the stripes are painted green and black, and the field of stars, black stars on an orange background. If you will stare at the little white dot for a length of time, and then quickly shift your eye down into the lower rectangle to the tiny little black dot in the center of it, you will then visually, having tired your eyes tiring of the opposite colors, will then see the flag in its normal colors of red, white, and blue. Your image then loses, or it fades out quite soon, and you have to glance back up at the top flag to be able to establish that visual pattern of where your memory places things on your vision, that it retains that vision for some length of time, even when staring at a blank surface. Slide, please. Slide, please. And then he builds this one that is actually three. It may look painted with the shadows down at the bottom, but are the three flags set up on top of each other so that you actually have a dimension, a depth dimension of about 5 inches here. The flags themselves are about 30 by 45 inches. Slide, please. In looking at the commonplace, at around 1958, he did a few sculptural pieces. This one is just a light bulb that has been cast in bronze, making it a very permanent thing. An impermanent object, such as a light bulb, that is very commonplace, but would burn out, would break, would be discarded, then becomes very permanent as a piece of art. Slide, please. And in this one, called Flashlight number 1, he had an idea, as most of you do, of commonplace things, of what they should look like. And he decided to go out and just buy a flashlight and embed it in a sculpt metal, which is a quick drying, sort of pliable aluminum type metal mixed with sort of an epoxy that does dry, and found out that his idea of a commonplace object wasn't so commonplace after all. Because the idea of what he had, which would be the average flashlight, was very difficult to find. Most of them had red plastic with wings and all sorts of streamlined shapes. You could get everything except the average one, or the one that you have in the mind that represents the average of a flashlight. Slide, please. In this, which is one of his major compositions of breaking up objects, which is called False Start, it was done in 1958, is sort of a turning point in his breaking up of this normal grid pattern that you found in the earlier gray alphabet. He has used the letters arranged as colors that slightly confuse you, in that the color itself has no meaning whatsoever as to what color it's on or what color it represents. But the strong grid pattern now has broken up into sort of a asymmetrical division of space, of these splotches of color that break up the surface of the painting. Slide, please. And then one much in the same manner, also from 1959, which is called Shade. Slide, please. Once he starts on a theme, he carries throughout the idea, the stenciled letters that break up the surface, the object, the flag, or the target series that he used earlier. Slide, please. And this one, a fairly large 40 by 40 square inch canvas, which has the title of it included as part of the design, is called Device Circle. Slide, please. And a close-up of the textures of the paint. He still is working in the encaustic stage at this point. Slide, please. This one is called Thermometer, and it has a long glass-tubed red-lined thermometer included in the canvas. He will do this during the series of the early 1960s with these objects that are included in the composition. There is nothing really of deep thought or sort of an agony or the emotion that you find in the abstract expressionist work. For instance, the violence of the woman form that you see in de Kooning's paintings, or the actual physical violence that you see in the technique of Jackson Pollock's work. Jasper Johns presents sort of straightforward and the earlier style, fairly clean-edged work, and then later in these splotchier colors. But they always seem to have a slight whimsy to them. They're presenting the commonplace without any emotional effect whatsoever, presenting them to you in a very cool fashion for you just to sort of enjoy looking at. Slide, please. Slide, please. We'll have this slide, 2 slides later, in color, and this is called, and it's not called anything else but painted bronze. To get away from the identity of the subject matter, as he said, something as normal as a beer can, one of them opened, or it appears to be open, one of them not. In casting these things in bronze, then he goes back and paints them in a very realistic manner. He said these things which we find are commonplace, that the idea continues with us no matter how much the design changes. He says, as unfortunately as even his American flag series is now dated because of the number of the stars, the beer cans are also dated because soon after he completed this, they changed the design on the cans. So then they become sort of mementos of history rather than everyday commonplace objects. Slide, please. And his brush, cans of brushes that are cast in bronze, these are, of course, would be actual size, about 13 inches high, and then he repaints them to look like they originally did. But this would be solid bronze. Slide, please. And a return to the slides of the beer cans in color. Slide, please. And then in the 1960s, he goes into a series of what Rauschenberg, another painter, called combines, of where you actually include objects as part of the composition in the painting. Slide, please. And in this one, where the canvas is slit and the 2 little metallic balls then almost become eyes piercing out through this large slit in the opening of the canvas, where paintings become more than just the surface, but they become almost sculptural effects in their dimensions. Slide, please. In the early 1960s, he began his map series, where the large contours of the different states, all obligingly lettered correctly in stencil letterings, become huge patterns of almost a patchwork quilt over large areas, usually up to about 10 and 12 feet wide. And he worked on this theme for about 2 years.
Okay, slide, please. He continues in using like the yardstick here with the cup attached that actually makes the imprint on the canvas surface. Slide, please.
Rectangle with 35mm slide.
And in this one, where the canvas is split, and you do have the problem of 35 millimeter slides not being square. This is a square composition. Slide.
Slide, please.
With the stencil letters. Slide.
This is a return to the device circle theme. Slide, please.
He is making imprints
Slide,
on
please.
different things, like with the ruler and the plastic spoon attached to a string. Slide.
In these combines, you see the little canvases, the stretcher bars that are attached to the surface down at the bottom. The broom itself being used as part of the composition, swashing the paint in a certain direction. And then, as if the object wasn't commonplace enough, he finds it necessary to label it. Slide, please. And another one of the map series. Slide, please. Slide, please. And then in the middle of the 1960s, around 1963, and this continues on up into his later paintings, he continues to use the letters in sort of silhouette forms of where they're actually the three-dimensional letter and then the impression or the silhouette formed by that letter. This is called one of his field paintings. Slow Field is the title of it. And he even has the little accented hinged piece at the bottom of where painting no longer stays within the neat confines of the rectangle or the square of the Renaissance period, but they go beyond it. They shove beyond it. They become sort of space inhabitors, that they occupy a space themselves. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. And a close-up of the last one, where he used the color notation. Slide, please. Another one of the field paintings where it's almost a duplication or a mirage effect, where these letters stand out, and we'll look in closely at the letter D up in the top part of it, where the canvas has a strong central theme to it, and returning to old themes of the beer can and the paintbrush, the coffee can for the paint things. Slide, please. Of where you can get sort of an actual effect where these three-dimensional letters then jut out from the forward plane of the canvas, creating the three-dimensional effect, and then the painted image on either side of this letter then sort of makes up for the reflections. Even though there is a feeling of messiness and of raw edges in Jasper John's paintings or the later paintings, there's a cleanness to the colors, there's a nice overlapping of the shapes, and there's a freshness in his approach to the application of paint. Slide, please. And again, the same theme. This is a painting entitled where he even has on the back of the canvas in the lower left-hand corner the title and sort of the date, almost like a sales tag effect attached to the surface of the painting. Very interested in color. Slide, please. And the latest painting that we have in the series, done in 1966, is called Passage Number 2. It has the mannequin leg attached in the upper section, and part of it is wired. The upper section, the red, is in neon tubing, so that you have a light, an actual light source into the painting. Slide, please. What a difference it seems from our sort of fresh 20th century point of view in Jasper John's painting to return to an 18th century point of view with John Singleton Copley, C-O-P-L-E-Y. Slide, please. Gilbert Stuart, in a slightly different way, another 18th century American painter whose main source of income was painting portraits, people wanting to depict themselves and their wealth and their position. Fortunately for us, Stuart and some of the other revolutionary painters lived in an early period of our history that they were able to record the great figures of our heritage. Slide, please. Again, picturing the history of the period was George Caleb Bingham, B-I-N-G-H-A-M. In The Great Push Westward, Discovering the United States, Bingham portrayed the Midwestern area around St. Louis. Slide, please. And then depicting the attitude of the American public following the Civil War period and up until the 20th century, Thomas Eakins, E-A-K-I-N-S, a very realistic painter interested in human anatomy, the correctness of light, perspective, and of anatomy. Slide, please. James McNeill Whistler, W-H-I-S-T-L-E-R, depicted the Americans' point of view of those who lived on the continent or lived abroad. He still considered himself an American at heart, even though his style is more influenced by the more sophisticated Impressionist and Post-Impressionist styles. Slide, please. Albert Pinkham Ryder, R-Y-D-E-R, was a mystic of the late 19th century. He drew from subject matter from literature, Shakespeare, from the Bible, from opera, in his own sort of dreamy imagination. Slide, please. Winslow Homer, H-O-M-E-R, also a late 19th century painter, depicted man's fight against nature, was one of the great American watercolorists. Slide, please. Depicting the changing attitudes of the United States in the early 20th century was John Sloan, one of the Ashcan group, who decided to select subject matter of everyday city, street life in New York City mainly. Most of them were illustrators, very good draftsmen, but showed sort of everyday commonplace scenes. Slide, please. Georgia O'Keeffe was a modern abstract painter following the more international, sophisticated mood of the United States following the First World War in the period of the 1920s. Her style, or mature style, was established fairly early, and even though this one is a very late painting, it follows more or less the same philosophy as the painting she did in the 1920s, based on nature themes. Slide, please. Grant Wood was certainly a mid-1930 painter, period of isolationism in the government, before being dragged into the Second World War. But the feeling of abundance of the farming land of the mid-United States, done in sort of a stylistic, not exactly realistic fashion. Slide, please. Then the tempo picks up in the 1940s in Stuart Davis, and we must remember that our abstract expressionist group was rebelling against those plump little farm scenes that Grant Wood completed in the 1930s. And Stuart Davis certainly has one of the places as the old masters of the American abstract school, selecting his symbols of modern colors, the the sort of angularity of the modern style, using symbols and letters seen in everyday life, but in bright, flat patterned abstractions. Slide, please. Edward Hopper was a realistic painter whose style transcends many of the decades and the changing styles of the early 20th century. He died just a few years ago, but he portrayed sort of the loneliness of the figure within city atmospheres. Slide, please. Andrew Wyeth is one of the great American realist painters today. He depicts, again, the sort of loneliness of rural life with sort of the haunting, unknowing aspect of death, of the people sort of waiting for the unknown or looking toward the unknown in an extremely realistic fashion, using the early Renaissance technique of tempera painting. Slide, please. Jackson Pollock, P-O-L-L-O-C-K, freed the contemporary artist from all academic styles of introducing the paint slung, drip, splattered on the canvas, creating patterns and designs that sort of defy gravity in their spider-webbery effect.
Slide, please. And Willem de Kooning, another one of the abstract expressionists, using the figure, especially the female form, in many of his paintings, with the same active application of paint that most of the abstract expressionists use. Very messy, but with great emotion, attacking the canvas in what they call action paintings. Slide, please. Robert Motherwell was the intellectual of the abstract expressionist group. In his early canvases, especially the elegies to the Spanish Republic, were large black oval shapes embedded between columnar shapes, with the color scheme basically black and white with additions of ochre, rust, and cerulean blue. Slide, please. And Jasper Johns, the transition painter between the abstract expressionist group and the prior painter to the pop or popular style art of the 1960s, in his flag series, where he took the design of the American flag as a symbol of our country and used it as an emblem in showing the everyday commonplace objects, presenting them to people as that symbol. Slide, please. And the primitive artists, going back in time, the untrained, naive painters that presented their world in a very charming fashion with lots of detail, although it lacked perspective. They were able to present a charming scene of colonial American life.